This is episode 188. I'm Tommy Serafinsky, and you're listening to the Conservation and Science podcast, where we take a deep dive on the topics of ecology, conservation, and human-wildlife interactions. And today, we are going to talk about the future of scientific publishing. And to do that, our guest is Dr. David Green, who is the founder of Stax Journal. And what Stax Journal does, it's a platform that redefined the process of peer review. And they turned the peer review process once again into a collaborative community activity. Community of researchers, of course. But in this episode, we are not only going to talk about Stax journals, we're also going to talk about some systemic problems in scientific publishing. Like, for example, we're going to discuss the fact that 75% of scientific journals are owned by just 4 corporations, which are just effectively monopolize the process of scientific publishing. We are also going to talk about the publish or perish culture, and I couldn't not bring the Planck's principle. Yes, that's Max Planck, German theoretical physicist, who said, science advances one funeral at a time. And we are going to talk about how Stax Journal is preventing this from happening, because it's not a good thing, and how they allow and enable science and move at the faster pace, and as a result also how scientists can move faster with their research and also with their careers. And finally, we are going to talk about AI. Use AI in scientific publishing and whether it is good or bad, whether it should be banned or embraced. So that gives you a pretty good idea what is that you're going to learn and what we are going to talk about in this episode of the podcast. So I'm not going to drag this introduction any longer. Ladies and gentlemen, David Green from Stax Journal. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Tommy. I'm excited to be here.
I am delighted to have you. I wanted to do the episode about scientific academic publishing for a while, and this is this episode. Look, there is a lot of things and there's a lot to talk about, but I just want to start with where usually people wait till the end. We're going to start with that. So you're a founder of Stax Journal. Tell us, what is Stax Journal and how it is different on any other scientific publication platforms?
Yeah, I'm happy to. At Stax Journal, we've redesigned peer review to meet the needs of modern science. And so I think to really understand how it's different from other journals, we actually need to zoom out first and talk about what peer review is. And so, peer review is somewhat the foundation of science, right? It's the last part of the scientific process. And it's where you invite your colleagues to evaluate your research before it can be published and shared with everyone else in the field. But peer review, the process that we know of it, hasn't actually changed much in 40 years. And I would argue that it actually hasn't changed much since the 1800s. And, it was originally designed to create magazines with limited space. But now there's so much more science happening that the system's actually breaking down. And there are estimates that 50 to 70% of science is actually not ever getting published. And so we're missing out on a lot of information. And so what we've done at Stax Journal is we've totally changed the way that peer review happens to be more collaborative instead of in isolation. And so when an article gets submitted to Stax Journal, that goes right out to a community of researchers that have expertise in that field, and they actually collaborate on the review. So instead of looking at the article on their own and sending in their feedback to an editor who then determines what gets published, the community actually works together to vet and improve that research. And then they actually vote at the end to determine whether or not it gets published. And so, there's a lot of ways that makes our journal different than typical scientific journals. We have this collaboration piece, which is probably one of the biggest parts of it. But we're also working to increase transparency. There's a lot of mistrust in the scientific publishing process, and that has just grown over time. And for us, we want to bring trust back to the system. And so we publish all of the peer reviews with every article that makes it through our peer review process. And we do that because we want people to be able to know that they can trust the article that gets published and that they can use that science in their own work. And a couple of other ways that we also are different is our submission and review process are incredibly streamlined and efficient. There are estimates that it can take, for some people, it can take up to 2 or even 3 years to publish one article. And that is just unacceptable. When we're doing research, we're doing it to answer a specific question, and a question that is timely and important. And the publishing process, the final step of the research, shouldn't take years and years. That it can actually be outdated by the time it actually gets published. And then the final piece that makes Stacks Journal really different than other journals is we are built on a value of accessibility and inclusion. And so to publish in our journal, it's quite affordable. So whereas in typical journals, it can cost anywhere between $2,000 to $12,000 to publish one article, which has gotten to be outrageous. In Stacks Journal, you can have a year of unlimited publishing for $199. And we want people to really feel welcome to share all of their research by publishing it in our journal.
You mentioned 80% of science is never published because it never go through past the peer review element, or why is it happening?
Yeah, so I just want to correct that. It's about 50 to 70%. So not quite 80, but it's possible. I think we don't really have great data on this, but the best estimates are somewhere between 50 to 70%. And, there's a lot of reasons why that research isn't getting published. I think first is that journals were actually built around exclusivity, right? And they had only limited space in these like print magazines, right? When they first came out, they were a hard copy journal. And so they were actually built to exclude research, and they really only wanted to publish the splashiest findings. And so, back in the day when most of the research that was being done was like earth-shattering, groundbreaking advancements, it made sense to have an exclusive model. But nowadays, the science happens in much smaller increments, right? And so a lot of the research that's happening, probably this 50 to 70% of research that's happening, is not splashy, right? It's not big advancements. And right now, scientists don't actually have a great place to publish those results. And when you intersect that with how expensive it's become to share our research findings, you see that a lot of people are just excluded from this entire process. And so we're missing out on a lot of information. And so at Stacks Journal, we don't put a weight on the splashiness of a research finding. We want people to be able to publish all of their results, including negative results or pilot studies, because that is all really important. And when we think about, when you're doing research, you're trying something new, right? And oftentimes it doesn't work out, or you're inventing a new method or something like that. And that finding might not fit into like a traditional journal format. And might not be worth the thousands and thousands of dollars to publish. And so at Stacks Journal, we're really trying to decrease these barriers for sharing all of these important findings. And it's like, that's one angle of it. Another reason why so much of this research is not getting published is because, the processes of peer review haven't been designed to keep up with the pace of science. And so, I mentioned earlier, it can take years to publish an article. And so if you have a small finding, it might not be worth it to go through that process, that burdensome process. And, I started Stacks Journal a few years ago because I had one of these experiences. I had just wrapped up some research on, the effects of wildfires on carnivores in the Pacific Northwest. And I really worked hard to get that research out to the people who would be making those land management decisions. And it took almost 2 years to get that research published. And, during that process, there were lots of important decisions that were actually being made without that research, without that up-to-date information. And by the time it was published, some people thought it was actually outdated. And so I I thought it was just an issue in ecology, right? Like that is my background. I'm an ecologist by training. I've been doing ecology research for, 15 years. And I started talking to other researchers, and I heard that this was just a pervasive problem, that people's research was not getting published. It was not making it out there. And I've been in the science world for a while, and I know that scientists are smart. We're really capable. We're really talented. And it's like, there has to be a better way. And so through that research process, we developed this new model of peer review that can be efficient and streamlined and also very trustworthy.
And, I think when you go to the social media accounts, PhD memes and whatever, this is all about peer reviews and the last reviewer giving you some, crappy review. And I've been through this process myself. So I'm not going to be boring anyone with the stories of hey, can I get some feedback? And it's we all been there. Anyone, I think, who touched the scientific publishing know how painful that could be. So the inspiration came directly from your own experience that you said. Was that the straw that breaks the camel's back, and you said right, I'm gonna be, because I presume that's something that took you away from your main scientific research, and there was substantial body of work. But can you tell us a little bit more about the motivations?
Yeah, I think for me, it was definitely born out of my own personal experiences. I'm a conservation biologist, which is, I think, interesting for your listeners. And, I identify with this community quite a bit. And I really got into research because I wanted to make an impact, right? I wanted to make a difference, and I wanted to help preserve species into persistence for future generations. And I was doing research and was really excited about the research that I was doing. And, the final piece of sharing that research and actually making that impact is through this peer review process, right? And for me to go through that process and to have it be so burdensome and frustrating and demeaning sometimes, sometimes these reviewers can be just flat out mean or biased. It really, at some point I was like, we have to fix this. The peer review process that we have right now is really holding back so much of science, right? There's in this estimate that 50 to 70% of research is not getting published. That's a lot of information. And, that can really impact our society. That can really impact our environment and the conservation. And, the process has gotten so bad that in a recent study, 30% of scientists, and this is across all disciplines, actually think that peer review needs a complete overhaul. And this is such an important part of the scientific process, right? This is the final step. This is when you can take your research and you can take those findings and they can actually be used to impact policy. They can make big decisions. They can help with species conservation. And for that research to be held up by processes that can take years and thousands of dollars, it doesn't do any of us a good service. Yeah.
Crazy. David, I have a question I have this question for a while, and here you are, probably the best person to answer it, or at least offer your opinion. I don't know where that happened during the time, but from my experience, for the podcast and for my own interest, I often look for the information, look for scientific papers. And there was a moment in time where it occurred to be oh, all that stuff is paid. You have to pay to access the papers. And we know that, Elsevier or the likes kind of monopolize that thing, which to me is absolutely, it's a rocket scheme, because one, they're charging scientists to publish in their journal, and then members of public have to pay again to access that. A lot of that research is from public money. So to an extent, my tax dollars or my tax euro are going into doing that research. Now I have to pay again to access that. Moreover, the scientist not getting a cut of what I'm paying. Like everything goes to Elsevier. It's like, how is it even legal? Do you have any opinions on that?
Yeah, it's the system has really gotten out of control. And I think, what you've tapped on is some of the reasons why scientific publishing has some of the highest profit margins of any industry. And, there's no surprise because it comes from free labor, right? So all of the peer review process, that's uncompensated. Those are just, researchers that are doing this for the good of their fields to help advance science. And then authors obviously have to pay to then publish. And it's really interesting, how we've gotten here. And I don't know how much you know about the history of peer review. When I was doing research for Stack's Journal, I learned quite about how did we get here? How did we get to a point where, 75% of scientific journals are owned by 4 companies, which is outrageous, and which is what allows them to have this monopoly, to have this control, and to charge so much money. And it's, the system really didn't happen like this until the 1980s, 1990s, when the internet came on the scene, and, societies who had been traditionally publishing the journals, they had a hard time keeping up with the quantity of science. And they slowly started to offload their journals to these publishing companies to help with the systems and help with the processes and to make use of the new internet technology. But slowly over time, these companies have just gotten more and more powerful. And yeah, at this point, 3/4 of all journals are owned by one of 4 companies. And it's reached a breaking point. I think scientists at this point are ready for something new. The system is not working. And the system that they've created, this burdensome process and kind of opaque process that they've created, is preventing so many good researchers from sharing their findings. And so at Stack's Journal, we have worked really hard to create an inclusive and an accessible platform where everyone can share their research. We have these very affordable rates of just $199 for a year of unlimited publishing. So you can share as much research as you want to. And we're just trying to decrease those barriers. And in addition to that, we've created a system where reviewers actually want to do this work. It's, peer review it's often seen as a thankless task. It's something that we see, you just have to do it, right? If you're doing research, someone else is going to review your research to then have it be published. But the system right now, and especially these large companies, they just take advantage of scientists from both sides, both from authors and from the reviewers. And then, you're talking about the general public as well, also taking advantage of here. And at Stack's Journal, we wanted to create an environment where reviewers actually feel rewarded and want to be a part of this. And so the collaborative review process that we've created, we bring a small group of reviewers to every article. So whereas in traditional review, they have 2 reviewers, if they're lucky, we average about 5 or 6 reviewers for every article. And they come together and they collaborate on the review process. And so they're not working in isolation. And it's actually quite fulfilling for them. We've had reviewers liken it to being in a grad school seminar, where they're discussing the science and talking about it and being really thoughtful. And what's really interesting is that the reviewers come out of this experience saying that they've learned so much, right? Not just learn from the new research that they're evaluating, but also learning from the interactions with it among this community. And by bringing review into this discussion, community-based place, you see them agree, you see them disagree, you see them change their opinions and learn from each other. And then we also reward them. So at the end of the review process, if they can opt in to be listed as a collaborator on the final piece. Whereas right now, being a peer reviewer is really a thankless task that has been kind of co-opted by this system. And the reviewers have really loved this experience. We've had some of them refer to it as fun and refreshing, which are 2 words that I don't think I've ever heard anyone talk about or refer to the process of peer review as. And I think that's because we've made it really engaging. It's no longer in isolation. They are working together as a community. And I think they really feel like they're being a part of something special here to help advance their field and advance this new research.
This is fantastic. This sounds fantastic. And this sounds like exactly how it should be, that it is fun and people collaborate and they're learning from each other. I just want to finish off very quickly on the these four major companies that are monopolized scientific publishing. I always like just wondering, like, if a few big universities, or even like one for a start, like Oxford or one of the big ones, just decided like, no, we like Elsevier, we're not publishing with you. Just go, like, no. And I think there is not that many these big universities where a lot of research is coming out of them. If they decided to do something about it, those big companies would have to react and reform, let's say, the process. Why is it not happening? Is it because those universities are also so deep in bed with those big publishers? Or are they just don't care about it? Why this, comes from the like a grassroots movement scientist, and why the big universities who are doing a lot of research not doing anything about that problem?
Yeah, there's really a systemic problem here. I think that for scientists, when you're trying to make an impact and advance your career, that requires publishing your research. And so for the scientists, it becomes really hard to change systems. The systems are really set in stone right now in terms of you have to publish in these types of journals, and you need to publish in order to advance your career. In universities, you might need to publish in order to get tenure or promotions. And so I think for these big universities, they do have a lot of power, and they could, start creating some of these changes. And that's one of the things that I'm really excited about with Stax Journal is we're creating a platform where universities, where societies, where organizations can actually create their own scientific journals that give the power back to their communities. So, over time, over the last, 50 years or so, the publishing power has slowly been taken away from the scientists. And when you think about in the 1800s, when peer review and scientific publishing really started, it was done by societies, which were groups of scientists that came together to vet each other's research and to share it with the world. And over time, that process has really just been taken away and co-opted by these large organizations, these large businesses. And at Stax Journal, we are really trying to bring that power back to the communities who are doing the research, who are doing the peer review, and give them a platform that is run by them. Whereas the power has really been taken away, we are trying to give it back and say that, we can run peer review without these big systems, without these big corporations. And that's how it started, right? Like the original peer reviews were done by a society to share new findings. And over time, these big corporations have just kind of inserted themselves in that position. And now they have all this power. And so at Stax Journal, we are trying to create places or create systems that can bring that power back to where it should be and to allow scientists to really have ownership of that process again.
I have to ask that question, David. What's your views on Sci-Hub, which is become like if you want to get a paper that's behind the paywall, you go to Sci-Hub and it's like, yeah, it's probably there. What's your take on this? Do you think that overall this is sort of a good thing that gives people access, or are there any downsides from the perspective of scientific community?
It's an interesting question. I think that Sci-Hub was created because of these access issues that you mentioned earlier, right? Which I don't know if your listeners know this, but a lot of articles, right? You often have to pay to publish them. If you want them to be what we call open access, you have to pay even more. And so open access is just when it's like free for anyone to read. It's available publicly on the internet. And so organizations like Sci-Hub and even ResearchGate have come about to break down that barrier of access and to share research more freely. And so I think the creation of an organization like Sci-Hub, it stemmed from the need and the desire for all of research to be publicly available. And like you had mentioned earlier, so much of research is paid for by tax money, right? And so it should be owned by the public. But because these corporations have really taken over the control, they are able to make these rules. And one of the rules that they made was that you also have to pay to access that. And we're slowly starting to see that open access articles and science is becoming more the norm. But that at this point is highly unaffordable. So, I mentioned earlier that it can cost anywhere between $2,000 to $12,000 to publish one article. And it can be even more if you want it to be open access. And so at Stacks Journal, we are really trying to decrease those barriers. Everything published in Stacks Journal will be open access, and it's publicly available. It's all on the website, and it's also quite affordable. So instead of $2,000 to $12,000 for one article, at Stacks Journal you pay $199 for unlimited publishing for an entire year, and it's all open access. And so for us, it's, I think that websites like Sci-Hub have really come about to try to fix this problem that we all think that science should be open and accessible. But it's more systemic than that. We have to go to the source, and the source is at the publishing phase, everything should be open access and inclusive and affordable, which is what we're trying to do at Stacks Journal.
No, absolutely. I have no doubt that, Sci-Hub doesn't fix the root of the problem. It only fixes the problem downstream for people who want to access it. And for those who don't know, they're essentially like a scientific paper pirate site. I think that Elsevier and others were suing them many times, and they're just moving their domain here and there, and they're based somewhere in Azerbaijan or somewhere where they essentially are, not reachable by Western law. Let's put it this way. Listen, I gotta right now ask you the question, like a more general question in relation to scientific publishing. Anyone who know anything about it heard the term publish or perish. Some people even mentioned that there's perverse incentives to write the papers, and kind of like the whole system. Like you said, there are many systemic problems, and I guess this is another one of those. Can you give us your view on publish or perish, where they came from, and is it really, because that was my thought, is it like, 75% or 50%, however many science is never published. But then on the other hand, I feel sometimes like there is a lot of science that is maybe not published, but written, papers are written, and they have to be published somewhere, where actually is probably nothing to write about yet. They just have to publish something, because otherwise, bad things will happen to their career. And that also creates that thing. So my thought was like, I'm going to give it honesty. It's like, well, maybe that's a not bad thing that 50% is not published, but then it's a bad thing because those people have to publish. So, this is just my random thoughts on the topic, and I am wondering your take on the perverse incentive to publish and the publish or perish culture.
Yeah, well, peer review and publishing is the final part of the scientific process, right? And so when we do science, it's not, some of it is because we're curious, right? I think researchers and scientists are innately curious, and, we question why things work the way they are and how we can, invent new things or advance our fields or things like that. And so I think there's a lot of curiosity that is part of being a scientist. But peer review and publishing is the final piece, right? And so when you're setting up your research and you're getting funding and you're doing the research and you're analyzing data and then you write it up, that's the final piece. And that is how we make an impact. That's how we advance our fields. That's how we can share our results with other researchers. And so when we think about publish or perish culture, it's actually just part of the scientific process. And so I think when we think about researchers being kind of stuck in the system, this is part of being a scientist, is being able to publish your research. And I think that it's also at this point how you advance your career and how you make an impact. It's also how you stay relevant. If you're actively doing research and you're actively contributing to your field, you want to be able to publish your research and you want it to be shared with your other colleagues so that they can then build off of it and you can make an impact. And I think this is why it's really troubling that 50 to 70% of research is not getting published, because that means that so much of research is not making an impact. But beyond that, you think about the researchers who have done that research, right? And have spent years of their life collecting data or analyzing data or fighting for grants. And they are unable to make that impact, unable to get that credit that they deserve and for their contributions. And so at Stacks Journal, we are really focused on allowing all researchers to be able to publish their research and share their findings. And so at Stacks Journal, we actually just introduced a new article format called a 2-pager. And so this is an article that is less than 1,200 words. And this is great for like negative results or data sets or just small findings that don't require a full article to be written up about. And so we are really trying to make it easier for all scientists to be able to publish their research and make that contribution, because, publish or perish, you can think about it however you want. But I think at its core, what it means is that for us as scientists to finish our research, to make that contribution and to have an impact in whatever we're studying, we actually need to share it. And I think at this point, the barriers that have been put up for all researchers to be able to share their findings have been way too high. It's now extremely expensive. It's also an extremely burdensome process. And it's also a biased process. And so all of this makes it harder for researchers to be able to get their findings out, to make that impact. And so at Stacks Journal, we're really trying to decrease those barriers and make it easier for everyone to share their findings.
The thing that is really, bothering me, we heard, I'm sure everybody heard, and I even just had a whole list of things. Some new research, and it happened in many fields. I'm sure it happened in the fields of ecology. It happens in the field, probably most prominently of geology, but also other fields, that a research that is challenging a status quo, the current state of things, where there is like a lot of established research built on that. There are egos that sometimes in academia are very big egos, and young and up-and-coming scientists with these, groundbreaking or innovative or different approaches and different findings are often being, in the best case scenario, being dismissed, in the worst case scenario, being ridiculed and their career being destroyed. I'm sure many scientists who are listening to that can rattle off at least 2 examples of that. And, and even I think Max Planck said that the science advances one funeral at a time. The one that I remember is Clovis First, which was about the peopling of Americas, which was for the longest time the status quo, and this is what was happening. Clovis were the first people in America, and the evidence was building and building and building from different fields. And finally, I think there was one lady, I don't remember her name, she finally retired. And then it was okay, the Clovis wasn't really first, there was something else, something happening. So is the model that you're proposing somehow also going to, or at least aims at alleviating that problem in science and allowing scientists who are fighting, who have findings that might not be liked by people on top because they build their careers on that and they feel like their ego being attacked? Is that giving an outlet as well for those people? How's your feelings about the whole issue, really?
The process of peer review hasn't changed in hundreds of years, right? And so even in those initial peer reviews where the system of peer review, and I guess we haven't talked about this yet, but in typical journals, when you submit an article for peer review, it goes to someone usually an editor, an associate editor, who determines if it's good enough to go out for peer review. And so they are already making some kind of decision about the worthiness of this new research. And that can also be a point where that research gets rejected. So before it even makes it out to peer review or being able to be seen by any of your colleagues, it can be rejected. And so that's one person making that entire decision. And then when it actually goes out to peer review, it goes to two anonymous reviewers who work completely independently. They make their own decisions. They say whether or not it's good enough or it should be, accepted or rejected. They then feed that information back to that initial editor, who then determines the success of this article. And so what we see kind of baked into this process is the bias, right? So you have just one person oftentimes making a decision about whether or not this research is worthy or interesting or should be published or even should go out for peer review. All of that is handled by one person. And then when you think about these reviewers who are working in isolation, they also have an immense amount of weight just on their own opinions of like whether or not it's good or should be accepted or rejected. And so what this happens is it creates so much bias. And so thinking about your question, it allows for, a few established researchers or whoever's been, determined to be this editor or this peer reviewer to have so much determination on the success of that article. And so it allows for this to be used pervasively, right? Like you've described where, one person can say like, oh, this new thing is actually not good enough or competes with my own hypotheses. And so I want to reject it. In Stacks Journal, we've shifted that power away so that not one person has more weight than anyone else. So at Stacks Journal, there's no cover letters. We don't have any editors or associate editors. All of the decisions are made by the community. And so no single reviewer actually carries more weight than any other. And at the end of the peer review process, they vote. And so if more than 70% of the reviewers say the article should be published, then it gets published. And that way, no single reviewer carries any more weight. And helps to alleviate some of that biases that scientists might have when they're thinking about evaluating new research. And I think about, the estimates that 50 to 70% of research not being published. And I think about how much of that is because people aren't willing to share their interesting finding or their finding that they think bucks the trend of what's already out there because they don't actually think it's going to be publishable, right? Like if you've created or found something new or novel that goes against common beliefs or common understandings, it might not make it through that initial review or through that initial desk view. And so how much of people are just holding back on their science because they don't feel like it's actually going to make it through the process or it's not worth going through the troublesome or burdensome processes that are out there. And so at Stacks Journal, we're really trying to shift away the power from a few individuals and bring it into a more community aspect because we think that will help create better science and also get rid of this bias that is causing all of these issues in peer review. There's study after study that comes out that says that the current system of peer review has so much bias baked in. So if you're a woman, or if your name is not English sounding, or if English isn't your first language, all of that, you're more likely to have negative experiences in peer review, not just in the outcomes, not just whether or not your articles get accepted or are actually able to be published, but you're more likely to have negative outcomes where people are like mean or demeaning to you in the review process or questioning your abilities as a scientist, things that have no place in peer review. And so at Stacks Journal, we are bringing transparency back to peer review. And so that also comes with accountability. And so when articles are published at Stacks Journal, we actually publish the peer reviews. Those are all publicly available. Those are attached to the article along with the names of the reviewers. And so this is really novel in a lot of ways because it also creates accountability. People aren't going to be mean for no reason or, you know, they might actually think twice about what they're going to write in that review when they know their name is actually going to be attached to that. And so what we find is that it creates a much more constructive and positive environment that benefits both the authors and the reviewers.
Man, I am a big fan of Stack's journal right now. I am a big fan because like this is one of those things that we mentioned on top of the show that I know of the scientist who is native English speaking scientist, you know, perfect communication skills, but his last name is not English sounding, and he got comment like you should get someone who is native speaker to review your, and he looks at that and goes like, what the right, who actually wrote this? I would love to meet with that person. And you know, so these are the things I'm a big fan just right now based on what you said there, David, because this is like unacceptable.
Yeah, it's unacceptable, and I think it discourages so many people from sharing their findings. And I think that is what's really troublesome with the current system of peer review, which is that it holds so many people back. And it doesn't have to be this way. You know, we can create a system that lifts up scientists, that also makes it easy to share your research, and also brings trust and rigor back to peer review. You know, there's so many journals that are having articles retracted due to falsified data or plagiarism or AI, you know, all of these issues. And we need to change the system. We have to make it more accountable. We have to make it more trustworthy. And that's really what we're trying to do at Stack's Journal.
You mentioned AI. I got to ask you about that. What's your take on using AI in writing articles, and whether you feel like okay, I'm gonna tell you what I feel. I feel that a lot of academics there try to dismiss this as something like, oh, like it is so like. And this is coming big way. And I think that the sooner academia embraces AI as a tool, the better, rather than resist and say like, no, it's forbidden. But that's just my view on this. I'm curious, what is your view, and maybe even you have already anything built into Stack's Journal to either work with or against, because like with everything, there are good things, there are bad things, and you know, AI and the large language models can be used in a very positive way, for example, by scientists who English is not their first language, they not so fluent, and that large language model might help them formulate their thoughts in a better way, but at the same time it can be used to just, you know, BS your way into the publishing. So curious of your opinions on this.
Yeah, you know, I think that AI, you know, it's coming, right? And so I think that there's gonna be, for me, I think AI is a helpful tool, right? Kind of like how you mentioned it here, which is that I think that for a lot of people, it can be really helpful when they're formulating ideas or checking grammar or making sure that what they are writing makes sense or flows nicely, all of those things. You know, I think in terms of scientific publishing, it's a new frontier, right? And I don't think we quite know how people are able to use it effectively and appropriately yet. You know, I think that when people are using AI to draft an entire research article or fictitious figures like the rat, you know, I think that is where things get really complicated. And obviously that moves into areas of academic misconduct, right? I think if you think about AI as a tool that helps you create your best work, but that you are still at the core part of that, that's how I think it should be viewed. I think it should be used to help make your life easier, and it might be able to help make, you know, some of your writing better or improve your scientific manuscripts. I don't think it should be the only thing that you use. And I think that there's a danger when you become too reliant on it. And I think that it's still, you know, to be seen how this is going to really impact scientific publishing. You know, I think there's talks about how AI can be used as a peer reviewer or how to review new research. That I don't quite believe yet. I think that there's so much that that an AI model of peer review wouldn't be able to catch that an actual scientist can. And, just thinking about the depth of knowledge and the connections among different studies and the history of studies and things like that. And so, I think it's complicated. Like that's like the classic ecologist answer, right? Is that like, it's complicated. And, I think that when you think of if we focus on it as just a tool that can help you do your best work, that is where I think it should be in this moment. And I'm very curious to see how it continues to grow and evolve, and to see how, scientists are able to integrate it into their work in more effective ways. But, I was just talking to someone the other day, and, they were asking, is it ethical for me to use AI to help check my grammar when writing a paper? And I just responded, if you've used Microsoft Word or Google Docs or anything like that, they have some level of AI built in for decades, right? When you think about the little red line that goes under your words, or the little green line or whatever that says like, oh, you might want to think about this one instead. And so to me, it's like that tool, or thinking about AI to help kind of improve your writing, has been around for a while. And so it's more important to think about, am I using it in a way that I am relying totally on AI to draft ideas or to make assumptions or connections among the research? And I think that's where it starts to get a little more murky and a little more complicated.
Overall, what was the reception? How the Stax journal and the emphasis of the unlimited publishing and the annual membership and the whole deal? How was the overall reception? Did you get any pushback? What was the feedback, and was there anything negative?
It's a good question. When we first proposed the idea of Stax Journal and creating this new collaborative model of peer review, a lot of people were very skeptical. I went to scientific conferences and I talked to researchers across the spectrum in terms of their career, from undergraduate researchers to like very established professors. And there's this one person who like really stands out. They were totally skeptical. They didn't believe that a model of community peer review could work, that, you could get this many reviewers. And they've actually gone through the process as a peer reviewer, and they've become one of our most vocal supporters. And so for me, what I think about is scientists are ready for something different. The current system of peer review is not working. It's been designed to vet research and to help us share our research findings. And I would argue that neither of those processes are actually working very well. We have lots of issues with data sets being fabricated or articles being retracted, even in high impact journals or high profile journals, showing that the peer review system itself isn't working. And it's so slow and burdensome that almost, half or 70% of research is not actually getting published. So the system is breaking down. And I think scientists feel that. They feel that it's time to create something new that actually works for modern scientists. And so, the reception has been overwhelmingly positive. We've had authors who have gone through this process and been really enamored with what we've created, about how easy and streamlined it was for them to share their research, and how it makes them want to share more of their research with this, year of unlimited publishing. And we've seen, reviewers come back time and time again because they actually benefit from it. They really enjoy the process as well. And so, listeners can sign up to be reviewers at staxjournal.org and, experience what this feels like and to see what we've created. And for me, when I think about, people that are skeptical or people that are curious about this change, I would encourage you to try it and to see what it's all about, and to experience what a model of peer review that's collaborative and community-based, how that can actually bring trust and efficiency to a system that is way too opaque, way too biased, and expensive. And so when, we think about the reception, I think people feel like they're actually finally able to share all of their research findings, because they're no longer having to perform this mental calculus of like, is this research finding worth thousands of dollars for me to publish? Whereas, with a very affordable $199 for a year of unlimited publishing, they can actually share all of their research, especially with this new 2-page article format, to make it like much easier to write up something quickly, get it out to the community to review, and to get it published.
Absolutely. How do you see the future of open access publishing and peer review? How do you think it's going to play out?
I think open access is just going to become the norm. I think we're already seeing this in a lot of journals, which is that they're shifting to only open access. For many of them, that means that it's also become very expensive, which is such an unfortunate part of this process because they just pushed that burden onto the authors, which then limits the amount of research that can be published. I think there's been a huge backlash against these big publishers who have, made access to research a privilege. I think so much of this research is publicly funded. So much of it can help save lives or be used for, developing, new technological breakthroughs. And to have all of that be stuck behind a paywall is just, it's outrageous. And so when I think about the future of open access, I think all of research will become open access. And I've talked to scientists who say they will only publish in open access journals now because of how important it is and how they believe in that. And, there's a lot of governments out there that are also requiring all of research that's been publicly funded to be published open access as well. And so we're seeing this shift. It's obviously come a little slow. There's still tons of research that's out there that is not open access. And there are a lot of researchers right now who can't afford to publish in open access, which is why, we've made publishing in Stacks journals so affordable. And so when I think about it, I think it's beyond time for everything to be open access. And I think we're moving in that direction. But I think we also have to decrease this barrier of cost. Not everyone can afford the current rates for open access, which can be anywhere from $2,000 to $12,000.
Listen, you mentioned many times a platform that you're building a platform. Tell us a little bit more about the platform itself and, usability of the platform and also what part the technology plays in, building that platform, how much this is based on the technology and maybe a few words about that.
Yeah, at Stacks Journal, we have created a peer review platform that is meant to be streamlined and efficient. I think the current process to publish articles is very burdensome and very slow. It can take up to years to publish your articles. And at Stacks Journal, the platform is really built around these communities of researchers that come together around specific topics. And these are all over the place. We have lots of topics in ecology. We also have some topics growing in medicine and in chemistry. And this is where researchers come together to help advance their fields and help, share and review each other's research. And so researchers can actually sign up on our website for free at stacksjournal.org and join these communities that they are a part of or the research topics that they're interested in. And so the platform brings these communities together. And so when a new article gets submitted to our platform, it can automatically go out to this built-in pool of reviewers. So you don't have to look for specific reviewers for a single article. It can automatically go out to the community that has that expertise. And for anyone to review on stacksjournal.org, you have to have published a peer-reviewed article. So you have to have gone through the process of peer review and understand what it's like to be an author. You also have to have experience in that topic as well. And so the platform is built around these communities, bringing them together to help make this process of peer review both more efficient and stronger and more trustworthy. And so when a new article comes through, we get a handful of reviewers working on each paper, and they collaborate on the article, they learn from each other, and this whole process becomes very streamlined. And so, our affordable publishing fees of just $199 for a year of unlimited publishing is really to help us manage this platform and to make sure that it works efficiently and also make sure that we're keeping up with what the needs of the communities are.
How long it took to develop that platform? I presume that was also like a big part of it and a huge undertaking.
Yeah, totally. I mean, my background is in research and not in technology. And so I had to learn quite a bit and had to learn, what would work for this community, what would be trustworthy. and what would be accessible. I think like over time, so many people and so much research have really been cut out of the peer review process. And this is just because of how opaque it's gotten, how burdensome it's gotten, and how taken over by these large corporations. And so for me, when I was thinking about building this platform and thinking about how we could improve peer review for future generations of researchers, I wanted something to be accessible, and I wanted it to be streamlined and easy to use. And, the authors that have gone through this process and the reviewers that have gone through this process have really enjoyed it. I think that for them, we actually see reviewers coming back time and time again to review new research on the platform because they like the experience. It's quite rewarding for them. And so, whereas right now, the traditional process is quite opaque, quite slow, quite burdensome, it can actually take a full day of work or maybe even longer just to upload your article to get it into the peer review process. And that's valuable time that researchers want to be spending on other things. And so, at Stacks Journal, you just drag and drop your article into the submission site. There's no more formatting requirements. You don't even have to have a cover letter. These are all, I think, antiquated. Those are relics of a history of scientific publishing that were started around print magazines. And they don't take into account anything with the internet or anything about the new technology and the capabilities that you can build into a platform. And so our goal was really to kind of bring peer review into 2024, whereas it oftentimes feels like it's still stuck in the 1800s.
What would success look like for Stacks Journal? Do you see the situation where Elsevier comes to you and say, "Hey, David, here are the suitcases full of money. We want this platform"?
For me, that is not an option. I think that my goal is to give the power back to the scientists. And I would be I would never do that. I would never turn this platform that I'm building and this community-based model to one of these big publishers who has really taken over the system and controlled it in a way that is frankly unethical. I think for us, the goal is to free researchers to be able to share their findings, to make an impact, to have their contributions be seen. And I would worry that any kind of changing of that to one of these other big corporations would go against all of our values. Our values are really all about having peer review be constructive, have it be efficient and affordable, and be open access. And I would be concerned that if we ever sold this to one of those corporations, that they would take those away just for profitability. And so success for us at Stacks, and success for us at Stacks Journal is to become a place where collaboration happens, where people want to come together and advance their careers and discuss new science and really have a shared ownership of the future of scientific publishing.
This is great, David. This is really great. I can see that you are a man on a mission, and this is very commendable mission. You turned me into big supporter and a big fan of Stacks Journals because it seems like you folks are trying to address at least the most pressing problems in science in general, not only in scientific publishing. Look, man, we're coming up on time here. Do you have any advice, any words of wisdom for young scientists, new up-and-coming scientists, or maybe the scientists who are not so young, up-and-coming, but are frustrated?
I think for younger scientists or scientists in general, I think it's important to feel that they are part of the system, right? They are integral to making new discoveries. They are integral to advancing our society. And the research that they do is really important. And that these contributions, no matter how big or how small or how splashy they all add up to benefit our society. And so when I think about, early career scientists, it's very easy to feel like an imposter, right? It's very easy to feel like your research isn't as interesting or as splashy or as impactful as some other research that's being conducted. And I think this is really destructive, right? Like that is a bad place to head towards. And I think some of it, honestly, is because of the systemic issues in scientific publishing, which is that, has placed this hierarchy on the findings, right? And like certain findings are more important than others, and those should be published in high impact journals. Whereas most of research, the bulk of research that gets done are small incremental findings that kind of build up towards our collective body of knowledge. And so for early career scientists, like I would encourage you to feel valued with the contributions that you make and to know that the research that you're doing is still going to have a big impact, even if it's not super splashy and it's going to be important for someone. And so I think it's really important to kind of shake that imposter syndrome and to also feel like you're making important contributions. And I would also say that like research is really hard. I've done it. I've been there. I've done it for 15 years, and I think that it's not an easy process. And so it can feel overwhelming. It can be easy to feel discouraged. And I think it's important to keep moving forward and to recognize that no matter what you're doing, it's going to help make an impact to someone out there. And so to feel valued, to feel important, to feel like you belong as a scientist, because I think that there's so much weight that's put on exclusivity, that's placed on a hierarchy of research, that it can actually be really destructive to early career scientists. And so, at Stacks Journal, we're really trying to lift up researchers. We're really trying to make it inclusive, to make it accessible, because these hierarchies and these, determining like what research is worth being published or not being published, I think that does us all a disservice. And so we're really trying to create an organization that, helps early career researchers, but also researchers in general feel important, feel like they're making important contributions as well.
Folks, anyone who is as fired up about Stacks Journal as I am, go to stacksjournal.org or www.stacksjournal.org. And if you like this podcast and our conversation, leave us 5-star rating on Spotify, Apple, or just a good old thumbs up on YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube, David, thank you so much. You're doing great work. I really appreciate your time. Great stuff.
Thank you so much for having me, Tommy. It's been a lovely conversation.